Hi, my name is Zach Benrosh. I'm going to be your co-host for the Pure Conversation podcast. I'm currently pursuing a master's in digital media with a focus on data visualization. By now, you will have picked up on my accent, and no, it's not from Brooklyn, and no, I haven't met the Queen. Yet. I'm looking forward to bringing you an engaging, insightful, and worthwhile podcast for you to listen to, and potentially some interesting guests along the way. A disclaimer for this podcast: any advice given is purely opinion based and shouldn't be taken as professional financial advice. Welcome to Pure Conversation. My name is Zach Benrosh, and I'm here tonight with my co-host Joe Miller and our esteemed guest, Ms. Stacey Zrihen, who is a financial planner for Westwood Financial Management Program. Westwood is a volunteer program for Achiezer, which provides financial advisory help to teach people who are in financial trouble with budgeting and financial planning. Most recently, she started a course teaching newlywed couples how to plan so that they could be prepared for whatever is thrown their way. So I'm going to open up the floor to Joe Miller to interview our esteemed guest, Ms. Stacey Zrihen.
Thank you very much for joining us. So I'd like to know a little bit about you. Tell us, what is your background in financial planning? How did you get into this field of work?
So interestingly, I started off with a marketing degree, which of course has nothing at all to do with finance. And I spent a number of years working in marketing and direct marketing. Always loved budgeting since I'm little, but kind of did it only for myself. And then it started with some good friends, and then it started with some people that we knew. And before I knew it, I got called in by Achiezer about a little bit over close to 10 years ago, to help out with some people who were having financial issues at that time. And that's when it went from being more of a hobby or something that I did for people that I knew to people that I didn't know. And that's how we started. And I've since finished my education to be a certified financial planner, taking my board soon. So wish me luck. And that's how we got here.
Wishing you really, really great luck in that. It's actually funny because I'm in a very similar case. I'm also doing a marketing degree and hopefully planning going into financial advising afterwards. So I'm sure I'm going to hopefully rack your brains in this interview.
With pleasure.
I appreciate it. And I hope our listeners gain something as well from it. Okay, so what made you start your new program recently?
So when I started working with Achiezer, I also was working with another organization that had been around in the Five Towns area at that time. And when I first started out, it was really people who were in dire straits. We were getting calls from all kinds of families in the Five Towns Farakwe area who really were struggling. They either had houses in foreclosure or mountains of credit card debt, and they were calling as sort of like a help me, I don't know what to do. And over the years, the amazing thing that we've watched happen, which we've really, really just been amazed by, and it's taken this program to a whole new level, is we went from having people who were only in dire straits, who we were, advising how to get out of a tight situation, to starting to see people younger and older who were not in dire straits, who wanted to know how to save for Simcha, who wanted to know how to save for a home, who were interested in information about investing or financial planning. And I would say that we're probably maybe not 50-50, but getting there, where the number of people that we're meeting with that are not struggling has grown so much. And I have seen over the years how amazing it is when you can get in and work with an individual or a couple early on and save them the road of making the mistakes and then having to unlearn those bad habits. So that's what prompted the new program. And we've actually, you mentioned earlier the newlyweds, but we've also been doing great Zooms with singles, both men and women. We did a YU Connects event, which was terrific. And really just speaking to people who are younger and who are starting out on their financial careers and their paths, and who are getting now interested in understanding the basics of budgeting. It's not complex. And if you learn it early, it's really can be a very powerful tool. So that's what prompted that change. And we're really loving that. We're loving to see that that the majority of people coming through are not actually those who are, last minute.
Do you find that that there are different issues for different demographics? Do you find that newlywed couples either going through issues or are looking to solve issues that are different than, let's say, people in older demographics? For example, one might think off the bat that someone who's older might probably be dealing with issues like mortgage or credit card debt, whereas a younger person might not have those type of issues.
So the issues are definitely different. They're different for single people and for married people. They're different for yeshivish people and more modern people. They're different for New Yorkers than out of towners. And one of the beautiful things, I know this is a slight tangent, but the last 9 months, it's no longer limited to the 5 towns Far Rockaway area. It used to be anyone who really could come in. Occasionally we'd have somebody fly in from Chicago or from Florida. Now it kind of doesn't matter where you live. So anybody who is in need of that assistance. But to get back to your question, Joseph, there are definitely different issues. At the end of the day, though, good planning is good planning. And it's good planning if you're saving up for your children to be able to learn or to help support them. And it's good planning if you're saving up for a house or for a simcha or for vacations or for retirement. And those lessons definitely go across all of the different demographics and ages based on.
So with that, what do you find are what are the specific issues that you find usually people, I guess across, I would say, your main demographics, do you find people usually struggling with?
So a big issue, and this is just, when I first started doing this, I thought I was going to come across tons of people who were spending unnecessarily, who were taking these crazy vacations and, spending money they didn't have. And of course, as you both probably know, just from growing up in Jewish homes, in religious homes, just to actually live a modest lifestyle and send your kids to private school and to be able to just have, a camp experience for a kid. Those things can be incredibly expensive. If you're looking at a larger family, just start multiplying the numbers. So those are issues that we talk about a lot, and that we work with our families on a lot. Those are,
Nice. Okay, so quick question about how Achiezer is run, because I'm assuming it's based on a non-for-profit organization model. So are you asking for anything from the people who are involved in the program, who you help out? Do you ask for donations if you help them? And then how do you raise money to keep Achiezer afloat?
So Achiezer is an umbrella organization. They don't just run the Westwood Management company. Most people in the 5 towns Far Rockaway area are very familiar with them. They got very familiar with them, unfortunately, around the time of Hurricane Sandy, when they were in every nook and cranny. Again, during COVID, when they were opening and helping to staff, beds and clinics for people who were not well. But they hospitals, there's a camp fund, there are all different, they have a medical referral service. And really, Baruch Ber Bender, who's the head of Achiezer, is involved in pretty much anything you can imagine. If there's any type of an emergency, or if somebody needs something, whether it's, Chaver Kadisha, or God forbid, an emergency, that's the number to call. And when it's things that other organizations handle, then they farm them out. And if it's things that kind of fall through the cracks because nobody handles, Achiezer takes those on. So the Westwood Financial Management Program is one branch of Achiezer. So we are under that umbrella. The volunteers who are the financial planners for Westwood are volunteers. We are not paid, and there is no, there's no remuneration. That was bad. There's no cost for our services. And people sometimes will even get on and say, wait, I don't understand. How do I pay? When do I? There is no cost for this service. It does not matter if you're in dire straits or not. Of course, there have been people, over the years who have said, oh, this was so helpful and we are in a position to be able to pay you for your services. And we say, please give a check to Achiezer to help them continue their wonderful work. But there is indeed no cost for this service.
That's amazing. With that in mind, I was wondering, what are the things that you find in terms of long-term planning, do you find that that really can change, from people being in dire straits to being in, financial safety? Meaning, for example, credit card debt was one thing, but when you're speaking to the young demographic, based off of what you see in the older demographic, what are you telling them? What are the key things that you feel like you need to tell them?
So without alienating anybody over the age of 30 or 35,
No.
because there's always time to, but start early, start young. I mean, it's such an unbelievable possibility when you want to save for retirement. You know, we talk about compound interest. And I always give the example of the magical penny. And there's this, you know, they come into a college classroom and the person at the front says, I'm going to give you, you have a choice. You can either have $10,000 or you can have a magical penny. And your magical penny doubles every day for 30 days. Or you can take the $10,000. And the example goes that most of the college students say, well, I would take the $10,000. Of course, this penny does not actually exist. But if it did, it actually would be worth millions of dollars at the end of the month. Because when something doubles and grows and grows and grows, the growth is also doubling and also growing. So somebody, for example, who starts saving for retirement at age 21 or 22 and puts away 100, sometimes it's matched by an employer, $200 a month, even if they do that for a short time, for a handful of years, they'll actually retire with millions of dollars in the bank. Whereas somebody who can put away for many more years, much more money, but doesn't start until later, they're always going to be playing catch up. So the advice is start early, start often, just to get into the game early, to be aware. Unfortunately, what happens is people who are not aware of those things, they start building a family very often. They're married, they have kids, and these are noble goals, and we never talk anybody out of those. But once you've started to pay for those different expenses, and there's a camp in the picture, and there's tuition in the picture, and you have a mortgage, all of a sudden there's no money left for things like saving for retirement. Another big thing that I love working with young people on is tzedakah, is taking out that 10%. It is very, very hard to sit down with a couple or a single who is in their 50s or in their 40s even, who already has a full roster of expenses and debts that they need to pay every month, and say, oh, and by the way, you've got to pull out 10% for charity. But when you have a young couple or a young individual who's just starting out and they haven't really decided where they need to fall out on that, that's definitely something that they can include, and that becomes a lifelong part of that equation. So that's
so let's just use the charity example, taking 10% under charity, because that's like a hard number we can work with, as opposed to other spending where it's harder to know what percentage. But basically, how do you come to someone and tell them, with your budget right now you have to take out 10%? How does that conversation work?
So again, it works very differently for someone who's young and starting out than it does for somebody who's already established and who already has spending needs and habits that they've already committed to. As an example, I very often will sit down with a single, someone who's just started working, or via Zoom with the group in that age group. We had several successful seminars between, I would say, May and August, of young single women who were in their early 20s to mid 20s who had just started working, and they were taking notes furiously. They haven't started yet. They haven't committed to rent or to a mortgage, and they're just starting to work now. So when we talk about having an extra bank account and putting 10% of every check into it, even if they're not dispensing it at the exact moment it's coming in, but having it there and earmarked for Maser, for tzedakah, for that 10%, is something that's doable for them. And that becomes part of the habit and part of the routine that they get into. And once you do that at a young age, as you get older and as you earn more money, you still stick to that habit. I'm not a posek, and I don't tell people how to spend their money. And if someone obviously comes in and is having trouble, or if there's debt of any sort, I know that most rebbeim that they speak to, most rabbis, will tell them that they can hold off on giving that 10% until they are debt free. And so, of course, we deal with that on that level and on that basis, with the hopes that as things clear up, that they are able to introduce that into their routine.
Really nice. All right. So let's say the feedback that you get from most of the clientele that are coming to you, have any of them gone to other financial planners before, or any financial advising? And how do they see what you can give them versus something else that they're paying for? Is there something that you're not able to give them, or are you really just giving them everything they can, and it's an incredible service to the community?
It's a great question. There is something that I'm not able to give them because it's not my area of expertise. I don't sell products, so I don't sell insurance, and I don't invest money for them. I don't give specific investment advice. I guess those could be looked at as negatives, because if you need those services, of course, there are people that we would like to refer to and that we can suggest and look for. The beauty of me not selling any product and not making any money is that the advice that we are giving is really based on the benefit of that client. There's no ulterior motive. So I don't know that you can get that from somebody that you're paying. Specifically somebody, generally financial planners make a living, not always, but generally by selling product, by selling investment vehicles, by selling insurance, to people, whole life, term life. And so the advice that they're getting, it may be in their best interest. I would like to think that most financial planners are still good people who are not trying to trick their clients, but you can't say that it's a chesed shalemet. You can't say that they're completely altruistic. They would love for them to purchase things that will benefit the planner. In our case, there really is, other than the feel-good factor and hoping, to be able to help people out, there really is there's no motivation. That doesn't, I've had people say, well, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can call you back. And I say, I don't really care. It doesn't matter to me if you call me back. You need the service and I'm here to provide that. So it is really just for the client. And I think all of the advisors who work in the program feel that way and really have the clients, only the client's interest at heart.
Okay, so all the advisors, you said they're all volunteers. Do all of them do this full-time volunteering, or do some of them have their own practices on the side?
So and what about you also?
So none of us do this full-time, to my knowledge. I do a lot of the Achiezer cases. They do come my way. There are other, advisors. To my knowledge, none of the others are certified financial planners or working in that vein. They're just people who are good at planning and have helped out. We have worked in conjunction with people who do this for a living. We've met with them, we've spoken to them, and occasionally gotten feedback. This is not my full-time job. I don't do this full-time for Achiezer. And as of now, I do provide this service for some other organizations, High Lifeline and some other thing, but at this time, all volunteer. And if everybody can keep me busy, I'm happy to continue. If I start to get bored, I may have to take a job.
That's really incredible that you can devote that much.
Yeah. Also, we mentioned what were some of the things you saw with the people who come to you regularly. What about the newlywed programs you've been doing? Do you find that people people appreciated, or or that a certain area was definitely more appreciated by the people who attended? Were you surprised that what specifically the questions people were asking? What did you find from this program?
So it's a good question. I'm most pleased actually by the questions in general. I always, in the first few times that I did the seminars, I had my presentation was longer and I didn't really bank on that many questions and answers. And when I realized that people were super open, we don't record them, which I think has been great because there's no risk of your question that you kind of asked with this nice group of, 15 couples being aired somewhere or being available somewhere. So when people are on, I've been amazed just at their willingness to sort of, bare their souls and ask these kinds of questions. The questions they're different, but they're good questions. How much am I supposed to be spending on groceries? We're talking about childcare. How does that work? What are my options? Student loans is a very, very big question because a lot of times, people get this icky feeling when student loans are dumped in with the rest of their debt, because it is debt and it's debt like other debt, but it's debt with a purpose. I have a lot of clients who don't have credit card debt, but who do have student loan debt. And there are a lot of questions about that. My answers being different once you've already got it, and versus when you're looking into it, just to make sure that people aren't just sort of going to grad school because they're supposed to go to grad school, but really thinking about, will I make more money doing this? Is this something I love, and is this something that's going to pay for itself over the years? But overall, I've just been amazed at the caliber of people that we've been meeting with. We've had a lot of the people who've come on a seminar make appointments to meet with me afterwards, which is great because for some people this is very natural. I always use the example of I always tell people that they may feel a little bit uncomfortable. How come they don't understand money so well, and I have a better grip on their finances than they do? And I always joke and say, well, I'm about to go pay somebody to tell me to eat egg white omelets. For some people, certain things are innate, and for others, they're not. So sometimes people will hear this and they'll go, oh, well, I budget and I keep track and this makes sense and I can take that on. And I would say for half the people, they're like, oh my God, I don't know how to do this. And for those people to call in and then say, hey, can we set up a one-on-one and we'll go through and we'll put together their budget together. I think that's terrific that we can get to that, to that stage.
That's amazing. So I've got another question about, you mentioned the coronavirus and how you've been doing a lot of things virtually, but what impact do you think the coronavirus has had specifically on people's financial security? And are there any catastrophes that are just too hard to plan for? Yes, you can have insurance policies for certain things, but obviously you said you can't sell any insurance or anything, but do you think there are catastrophes, and specifically coronavirus, did that affect a lot of the people coming to you?
Right. So at the risk of not having been exposed to the entire world, I interestingly have not found I would have expected the number of people who call for appointments to have quadrupled or to be tenfold what it was a year ago now. And ironically, we're not seeing that. Does that mean that everyone's doing great during Corona? No, I wouldn't say that. In the beginning, I actually had a ton of clients, a lot, like most clients who actually were socking away tons of money from their stimulus checks, from this bumped up unemployment amounts. Some of them played their cards well and ended up ahead of the game. There's no question that small businesses, specifically people in travel, had a lot of reinventing to do. The PPP loans were definitely very helpful. Achiezer was able to work together with people at other organizations in the neighborhood to be able to answer questions where people had issues with applying for unemployment or for the PPP loans. And if they weren't sure how to proceed, that information was able to be gotten to them. But overall, I can't say that I'm seeing the tragedy financially that I expected. Again, I'm sure there's a planner out there somewhere going, oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Every person I'm working with. But again, there are different groups, and I'm not inundated. So that's my measure.
Do you think it's because people who are going to struggle financially are going to struggle no matter in what scenario they are, and people who are successful are going to make it work? I mean, is it something just ingrained on how people work, or do you think just, it could just be, explained away with other things like, stimulus checks or, other things that help people?
So I think there's every case is just so different. I've definitely seen people where I don't think the stimulus check on its own has, solved everyone's issues. But again, people who were careful to begin with and had emergency funds in place and were in a situation where they needed to apply for unemployment for a short amount of time and were smart enough to take that bang for the buck and invest it or save it or put it aside, and now are working again or have figured out a way, or we're working part-time. They were okay. And they were able to manage, what was going on. I think in general, obviously, people who are having a tough time may continue to have a tough time. I think for the hardest part, is people looking for new jobs. New graduates, I think, are having a very hard time. There's just not that much out there for them. And so I think that's been a little bit of a challenge. But my regular demographic seems to have weathered so far better than I would have expected.
Okay. So I've got a question about a lot of people, and then if you search this on Google, it'll be one of the first things that the results come up is, why should I see a financial advisor when I have an accountant who does my taxes, sees my finances? How are you different to an accountant?
Okay, so very different than accountants. Accountants are really looking at taxes, and they're looking at the tax implications of what you're doing, and that's great. My father is a renowned accountant. He's my accountant, and he's terrific. But the things that a financial planner looks at are in some ways more detailed, and in some ways even bigger pictures than an accountant, where we got unlimited minutes, yay. Okay. Whereas a financial planner is really looking at sometimes a bigger picture and sometimes more detail. I'll give you an example. I worked with a couple this past week who had been doing a fabulous job of keeping track of all of their expenses. They knew those expenses to the dime. They knew how they were paying for them, where they were paying for them, what vehicle they were using to pay for them. But when we looked at the bigger picture and we started to look for a 12-month scenario, we realized that they were like short about $1,000 a month. And by the end of the year, they were on track to be in the hole $12,000. That's not something your accountant's going to look at. They're not looking at your budget. They're not looking at your day-to-day expenses. They're going to look at what your annual income is and what the tax implications are. And a good accountant may even be able to guide you and ask more questions. But they're not looking at those details. They're not focusing on that. That's just not what their job is. It's not what they're paid to do. And I think when you have a team, I think as people have more disposable income and more wealth that's built, they do tend to develop a little bit more of a team. Maybe it's somebody who's in insurance, maybe it's an accountant, maybe there's a financial planner involved, maybe there's an attorney, maybe they have trusts, maybe they have wills, and those are all very, very important pieces of a puzzle. Most of the people that are coming for these services to Achiezer are not at that level. They're not looking at a big team. If they're paying an accountant, which many of them are, it's really to do a basic return at the end of the year. So this would be very different. This would be really looking at starting off with the little nitty gritty. What are you spending day to day? What are you earning? And then how does that look long term? How does that look in 10 years and 20 years, etc.?
Nice. So it sounds like there's like a space in like the non-for-profit area, maybe Achiezer to look into, to have like some sort of accountancy thing that's similar to what you have, what your program is. Cause then as far as I haven't done a great amount of research on it, but it doesn't seem like there's anything like this. Do you think could be something that we?
So the accountants do refer, Achiezer does refer to accountants that are definitely lower cost than most of the accountants that are out there. I don't know of any that are doing returns for free, although I will often encourage clients who have, a more simple income or W-2 or something that's not very complex to do their taxes on their own. And we'll sometimes even take a look at those for them just to make sure that everything looks correct. In terms of having somebody on staff, I don't know that we have a line of accountants waiting to do free returns. But it's definitely, if anyone's out there, come on. And we have a team of accountants that if we have questions we can ask. We have a team of lawyers. We had a number of people going through foreclosures, and we have pro bono lawyers who have helped. Same with credit card debt and people like that. So there's definitely a nice network there for people who need, sort of a one-time assistance.
For people who can't necessarily make an appointment with Achiezer, or even people who can't consistently come back, how can they learn more? How could they keep themselves on track? How can they get themselves in a mindset of budgeting and financial safety?
Great question. So there's, firstly, I don't see many of the clients regularly. Some of them, I have clients that I speak to monthly for years now. And I have other clients who I meet with once. We set up their budget and they're good to go. We've checked in with them. Sometimes they've said, oh, I would love a follow-up. We've had a lot of people actually come back after 2 years, 3 years. Hi, I paid off my debt, looking to buy a house. Could we meet again? And that's always, of course, a wonderful feeling, because you realize that you haven't heard from them, but they got a lot out of that meeting. So my advice always is, if somebody does have credit card debt, they should be meeting with an advisor, just without even a question. And in this case, there's no downside. It's a free service, and at a minimum, you have somebody else looking over your numbers. People who tend to not have any time for, and again, it doesn't have to be me, it doesn't have to be our team, but who don't have time to sit down and create a budget or work with a friend or a family member are mostly people who don't want to do this. They're not ready for it yet. If somebody is really ready to make those changes and to do that, there is somebody to sit down with, and they should sit down with them. It does not have to be a weekly commitment, a monthly commitment. It could be a one time, and they could walk away and say, okay, a lot of people have their numbers all over the place. A lot of what we do is just organize that information in one central location and get everything together so that they now know, okay, I do have 10 debts, but they're now all on this piece of paper, and I know which to pay off first and which to pay off second. And we've got a game plan. We know where we're heading with this. So my feeling, I do feel kind of strongly that if somebody is struggling with any sort of debt, or if they're not really sure how to do this, a meeting is really a no-brainer.
Okay, you were talking about credit card debt and specifically how people can pay it off. And a lot of the talk at the moment, and you'll see a lot of advertisement, and especially on social media, is how people should grow their credit score. Would you give any suggestions out there for how people should go about that, or what they should be careful of when they're doing this? What would be some of your suggestions, if that's okay to ask?
Yeah, sure. So, I fall somewhere. Are you familiar with Dave Ramsey at all? A lot of people listen to Dave Ramsey. He's the planner to the average American. He speaks to millions of people. He has a very popular podcast. And I would say 95% of what he says, I do agree with. When you do speak with somebody one-on-one,
I'd really like to hear about the 5%.
So I'm happy to tell you about the 5%. I mean, he is completely against any use of credit cards at all. And he is also against the need for a credit score. His feeling is that that nobody should ever take out a credit card, that there is no use for a credit score, that when you take out a mortgage on a home, there are one or two companies that will do it based on your income, and they're not looking to see how much money you've borrowed and what percentage you're paying. And again, when you're speaking to millions of people at a time, that's a fair, it's a fair statement. He can't discern, am I speaking to somebody who has $100,000 in debt, or am I speaking to somebody who's super responsible and knows that he doesn't know that. He's not speaking to one at a time. He's speaking to a larger group. When we speak to one at a time, if somebody comes to me and says, my husband and I have $30,000 in credit card debt, but we're thinking we should take out a home equity line to pay that off because this will give us a little bit more money available to pay for camp. That frightens me. And that's not a good idea. Whereas if I've got somebody who says, my husband and I have some money in the bank, we're both working, we're looking to buy a house in the next 3 years, what do you recommend? I do recommend that people have a credit card. I don't recommend that they ever carry a balance, but I do recommend that they use that card to pay for things that they're paying off monthly. If it gets to a point where they're spending more on the card than they would, in cash or that they should be spending, we can have a conversation about it. But I do believe in the need for a credit score for most people. So that would be in the 5% of things. I also do believe in higher education. And so in the right situation, I know Dave Ramsey would like everybody to get scholarships for all of their, for all of their college and grad school needs, but it's not always realistic. And would I tell somebody, no, don't become a lawyer, or don't become a doctor, or don't become a PA? Probably not. I would probably just have them go in knowing, is this something I love? Is this something I'm committed to? And if so, how am I going to get rid of this debt as quickly as possible once I'm working? So these are some of the thoughts, but that's the mindset.
Mm-hmm. And to someone who's just starting out, they've just finished college, how would you suggest that? Obviously, we can't go with everything like Mr. Ramsey says, but how would you suggest they build their credit in a safe way as possible?
I'm just going to tell you what I tell my own children. Once they begin work, I do think it is responsible for them to have one credit card, which they use for specific expenses, that they know how much those expenses should be, that they track those expenses and make sure that they don't lose track of the expenses because it's going on a credit card and not being paid out of an envelope in cash. But there's no reason to give up points. When I hear people taking out 15 credit cards because they're getting points from here, that makes me very nervous. Are there people, I've seen people do it responsibly. Joseph's laughing. I don't know your background.
You're talking to the wrong guy.
I'm sorry.
Zach is the king of those things.
No, but I don't listen. I've seen people do it responsibly. I've seen people who have benefited from having multiple, but it makes me nervous unless somebody's got a really great track record. I don't want to see different expenses on different cards and things flying around. That makes me nervous. Mm-hmm. So I'm a believer in getting a credit card once you started working and building your credit so that when you're ready to buy a house, if you're in good financial standing and you have jobs, you shouldn't have to use the one company that Dave Ramsey likes that doesn't need a credit score.
So you're saying there's like a happy medium between Dan's deals and David Ramsey's.
Okay. Yes. Yes. Agreed.
Yeah, because I'd say, especially in our community, a lot of people are very invested in like their miles and their points and everything, and it's a very, I think, heavily, you'll see a lot of people have a credit card for this airline because they fly on this route every so often. They've got a different one for grocery shopping because they know they're getting extra points on that.
I know, and I work with people like that. And again, if somebody is responsible and if somebody is financially comfortable and if somebody is doing it in a responsible way where they have not incurred debt and they're paying off their debt, not their minimums, but all their debt free, and they have money in savings and they're really doing it for the joy of the extras, I don't think that's a horrible thing. However, I would love to know the percentage of people with 5 or more credit cards who are debt free. That's what scares me. If somebody's got debt, don't tell me about your points. First, get yourself out of debt, and then we could talk about points.
Credit cards have to make money somehow, and then they're offering all these bonuses for a reason because they want people to use it. So I guess.
Listen, they do make money off of purchases. I do use a credit card and they're making their 2% or whatever it is on every transaction I transact, but that's the only way they're making money off of me. So
yeah, but the general person, and then if you Chase make most of their money off people.
I always laugh at that when people sit with me and they give me that list of credit cards and I, Chase Freedom. And I always laugh. I'm like, Freedom, this guy's not free. He's got $15,000 on the first Chase card. And then there's the Sapphire. And then there's the, it just gets very out of hand very quickly. So.
Listen, if he really wants the Freedom, he'll get the Freedom Ultimate card. But so it seems like a lot of the things that you deal with are more about habit breaking and creating good habits. I would say that would be seems mostly the line of what you're trying to teach people. So how does it seems like firstly, breaking habits is probably the hardest of the two. So how do you convince someone to break a habit, and then how, and is that different, or is there another way to develop a good habit?
I always use the example that growing up, we went skiing. And before, when we first went the first few times, my dad, who I'm very close to and who still enjoys skiing once in a while, he had skied, let's say 10 times before he took a lesson. And by the time he went in for that lesson, it was too late. He had already in those 10 times developed, poor ski habits that now needed to be unraveled and retaught. And you kind of always just go back to what you do. So the only thing I would tell people who are not young and starting out is they must have patience. They have to, they say with women when they're pregnant, it takes 9 months to put it on. It takes 9 months to put it off. To take it off. If you took 20 years to develop a bad financial habit, it's not going to happen overnight. You're not going to wake up tomorrow morning and be debt free. And you have to be willing to stick it through that time where you're going to be able to improve your habits and improve your numbers. And, a lot of it is, like you said, it's the 2 words I use are aware and deliberate. I want people to be aware. Once they've met with me, they can never be unaware again. That naive, hey, I don't really know what's going on. You're done. Once we've met and everything's on a piece of paper, you're now aware. And then the key after that is to be deliberate, to make decisions that are deliberate. I never tell somebody you cannot spend on A, B, or C. It doesn't work that way. But if you're going to spend on something, on anything, you need to know in advance what you've decided and why you've decided that. And they can't be haphazard, and you can't go and have a, a run at the, whether it's a grocery store or a clothing store, and just say, oh, I've got away from me. You've got to be deliberate if you want it to work. People who are paying off debt, I'll give you the best example. And this is, there are two methods, or two main methods of how to pay off credit card debt. Either you can pay them off the highest interest rate card to the lowest, or you can pay them off the smallest debt to the largest. Now, if you want to look at pure numbers, it makes more sense to pay off your higher interest rate cards first and then your lower. Why would you pay off a card that's at 12% before you're paying off a card that's at 24%? But it has been proven, and this is a big Dave Ramsey thing, it's called the snowball method, that just mentally and once you get little wins, it encourages you to keep going. So if you can pay off a $1,000 debt or a $1,500 debt, and then leave the $8,000 debts for last, it kind of doesn't matter what the interest rates are. It matters more that you stay in the game. Because if your first highest interest rate card or debt is at 25%, but it's for $20,000, and you've got to spend the first 18 months just paying off that one card, half of your people are going to leave. They'll never get past that first card. They'll never get over the first hump, and you've lost them. So the human factor, the emotional factor is tremendous. And sometimes it's important. I very often will give out to people a goal thermometer, like you see at the park when they're raising money for something, because you don't get that feel-good factor immediately. So I'll give them a red marker. I keep a thing of Crayola red markers and a goal thermometer, and we'll put the different levels of their debt so that they can color it in as they go, so that they realize that they're making this tremendous progress. And that each time they pay off a different debt, they're really building towards that ultimate goal.
Yeah, I'll just note, I read in, I don't know if you've read the book by Andrew Tobias, I think it's called maybe The Only Investment Guide You'll Ever Need, or some variation of that. So something very interesting he mentioned was that often when he deals with people who are in large financial debt, usually he'll tell them, even though it makes more sense to pay off the high interest as opposed to whatever you might make in the stock market or savings, he says he always tells them to open up a small mutual fund, a small account, put in a little bit, just so they see that they're building something. Even though it makes if you do the math out, they'll be making a lot more time the other way. I liked how you addressed that human factor, the idea that that it's not just, we're not just dealing with robots who are going to be able to do it, but people are going to end up trailing off in another direction. So you need to give them sort of encouragement. I find that concept very interesting.
It's exactly. And also one of the things, we look back, let's take it a step further. I did my first budget when I was 7 years old. My accountant, dad, and my mom gave us a piece of paper and said, okay, write down all of the things you need and how much you think they're going to cost. And we were literally like in third grade, and everyone else was just going shopping with their parents. And I was writing 3 skirts, 4 shirts, and just that exercise, thank God it was done in a very, warm and loving way. And it wasn't like, we can't buy you clothes, but the fact of going through and thinking that through and saying, wait, how much do I need? Do I need 7 skirts? If I see 7 skirts in the store that I like, do I need all of them?
How can you as a young parent plan for tuition coming up? You've got lots of other social pressures when you have kids. Kids are exceptionally expensive, and people are generally at the beginning of their earnings when they're having their first few kids. So what advice would you give to people who are just starting out and having those worries maybe in the back of their head already?
So I always start my meetings by telling people there's no magic wand in my bag, because there is nothing magical that I can say that's going to, all of a sudden make everything okay and easy. But I think if people keep their eye on their own situation, I have to say I am amazed, wonderfully amazed by the schools, at least in the 5 towns and Far Rockaway area and even beyond. Really, as expensive as the day schools are and as expensive as the yeshivot are, they're incredible. I have really never seen anybody who has been forced to go into debt to be able to send their children to yeshiva. And I think that is a tremendous, it's a tremendous amazing thing for those schools and also for the benefactors who are donating to scholarship funds at schools. So kol hakavod to those people. But basically, you have to know where you stand, and you have to look at things in advance and say, are we a family where, just because a lot of people send to camp, are we going to be able to do that? And I think people, we once had a class with Rebbitzin Weinberger, and the question was asked, somebody said, well, if someone's able to afford to do something in a lavish way, should they not, for fear of making others feel badly about doing it? And the example that she gave was, should somebody who knows how to play the piano not play because they may make somebody who's less musical feel badly? And the answer is, of course, no. And she said something that stuck with me. You need to know your station. You need to know where you're holding. If you're somebody who has the funds and has the means, you can look at spending that money in a way that's responsible for where you are. If you're somebody who is not of those means, it does not matter that 25% of the class goes to camp for 2 months. I mean, Achiezer is amazing with that. They've got a camp fund that really helps any family with 2 working parents. And I hope they'll be able to do that again this year, because it's really, I know it's been, a lifeline for so many families. But not everybody can go to sleepaway camp. And just because we want everyone to be able to go doesn't necessarily mean that. So again, parents who are starting out, think a little bit about what's ahead. With young couples, I do a 5-year look out. I don't just do a solid moment in time budget. I like to have them think forward. Even though, of course, we don't run the world and we never know what's going to be, it's still a good exercise to say, well, in 2 years from now, even though we're making it great on $4,000 a month right now, in 2 years from what's our plan for then, and how are we looking to that time, and what can we put aside, and what can we, where can we look at in terms of job growth, etc.
All right. And are there any other points that you think are important for people to know in regards to financial planning, and either family-wise, or even post, even if you're later on in the game? Are there any other things that you think it's important to know?
Yeah, I mean, investing is critical. I gave you the example of the doubling penny and of compounding interest. If you take money and you leave it under your mattress for 40 years till you retire, it's going to be the exact same amount that you put under there before you retired. I think people get very nervous when they're not comfortable with investing, and they think it's this complex, difficult thing that if they're not a finance major, that they don't know how to do. And you'd be amazed. There are really simple tips, and I would turn to Dave Ramsey for this. He gives like basic mutual funds, where to put 25% in growth, 25% in growth and income. And you can call any company, you can call Fidelity, you can call Vanguard, you can call anybody and say, I'd like to invest $1,000. I'd like to invest $500. I want them in index linked mutual funds. You don't have to be a finance major to know how to do that. So that's a very important piece. People often find that the $50,000 that's been sitting in their savings account is not doing anything, but magically that same $50,000 that was put into their 401k or their retirement account is at $500,000 because somebody was investing that money. And don't worry so much about where you're investing it. Don't worry about what's going to happen to it in the next 3 months. If it's for retirement, if it's for later use, invest early and invest often. You don't have to become a stock picker, but go with things that are just basic mutual funds. And over time, again, I can't, I'm not a Navi, I can't predict the future, but the stock market over the last 100 years has averaged, I think it's 12%. So that is something that I think is important for people of all ages to know.
I don't think you're being completely fair to the savings accounts. They are growing. That 10 cents, every couple months. I think is really big. It's not staying the same. They'll probably make $1 or so every few years.
So Joseph, you stick with that. Zach.
Okay, yeah, another just very last follow up, and then we're going to wrap up.
Sure.
A lot of people are going towards apps. There's lots of them. eToro. There's plenty of small investing apps out there right now. What would you say? Do you tell people to invest that on their own, try them out, or get the advice of a professional and go to one of the big companies like you mentioned earlier?
So I don't, I'll be honest, I've never used any of those apps. I do a lot with I tried out a lot of the budgeting apps, the mint.com and the everydollar.com, to make sure that anything that I was recommending use and that I knew what I was talking about. I personally budget on my Excel spreadsheet. If I'm tracking expenses, I do it straight on my phone. So that works for me. But I wanted to be able to offer apps, suggestions to clients. Regarding, I know there's a Squirrel and Acorn and all those Robinhood. I don't have a problem with them. And again, any investing is good investing. The only thing that makes me nervous are people who are too nervous to invest, and therefore they just leave the money, like you said, Joseph, sitting there for their 10 cents every 6 months. That's not a good idea. If people have, more significant funds, if they're getting closer to retirement and they're in a financial position where they have a little bit more money and they're a little bit more nervous, I will recommend an investment advisor. We have a few that we've worked with who have been wonderful. And for me, wonderful just means they take the time, they explain, they're not looking to do something fabulous. Anyone who says to me, we can beat the market, you lost me. If you can follow this market, you're in business, good for you. So I think as long as people are investing and they're doing mutual funds, and if they're not savvy and they're doing just basic things, again, linked to the market, index funds, things that are just very basic and general, I think they'll do great. I don't, will they make $10 more? Will they make 15% this year or 13%? I'm not as worried. I do ask people, I'll say, hey, you've got an investment advisor. What was the performance over the last 2 years? And when someone says, oh, I'm up 4% for 2 years, if you're up 4% only for the last 2 years, you need to reconsider who's got your money. But other than that, you understand where I'm going.
Got it. All right. And how can it, and for people specifically for Achiezer, how can people help out with Achiezer, with Westwood Financials, and I would say to the broader communities out there, how can people how can people help other people with these financial problems?
So the first is by not setting up these expectations that sometimes we do unwittingly, where we make people feel like if they don't do A, B, or C, or they don't drive A, B, or C, people should not be ridiculed for not leasing a car and for driving a used car. Things like that, those are things that everyone can do. In terms of specifics, hey, if you're able to, donate to Achiezer. They do fantastically wonderful stuff. They allow for these camp funds to be run. And
is there a website?
Yeah, achiezer.org. And I hope it's achiezer.org. I should really check that.
Can you spell that for our listeners?
1 second. Let me make sure before I think it's Achiezer, just Achiezer.
As per introductions, it was pretty clear that I couldn't spell it.
Okay, it's achiezer.org, O-R-G. And they're a fabulous organization. They do great stuff. So it's a wonderful thing. If you are a professional, if you're an accountant, if you're an attorney, if you're a planner, if this is something that you can be of assistance through Achiezer, by all means, call, be in touch, let us know how you can help out. If you're a client and you need help with your finances, please call, request a meeting. It's our pleasure anytime. They're private. It's done nicely. I'm loving this Zoom. I don't need to see anybody across the desk. This is great. I'm able to share the spreadsheet as I work on it so that the client feels that they're really participating and we do it together. And if you're somebody who's good at this, to whom it comes naturally, and you have either friends or family members who you see are struggling, offer just to sit down with them and do a budgeting spreadsheet, a worksheet. They're straightforward, and just write down everything that's coming in, going out. And I think you can help a lot of people.
Got it. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
We really learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stacey.
Good night.